Welcome everyone to AI Sprints, episode 4, season 1. We're just waiting for everyone to join, so we're just going to give Tim at the STEM Learning Community a couple of moments just to get everybody in, and then we'll kick things off with a fascinating episode where we are going to be asking, in a world of indifference, who is AI designed to care about? So that's your provocation for today. If you've just joined us, welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Alex. I'm a consultant for STEM Learning, also a teacher and a senior leader in 2 days a week. And this is our 4th AI Sprint. Been hugely popular, this series. Lots of you have joined us. There's been loads of chat on social media and lots of people reaching out post-event saying that they found the guests really engaging. And what we try to do from the outset here is get some really reliable voices to come around these ideas that are emerging in not just the UK, but the global AI context. And I've got 2 wonderful guests joining me today. And you wouldn't believe it, ironically, in a technology call, Bukky, you've been having some issues behind the scenes, haven't you? But it's great to see you. Welcome.
Thank you,
Fantastic.
Alex.
And have you come from a busy day of teaching today, Bukky?
No, actually, today is one of my days off. So it's been a
Oh,
pretty good day. Yes, thank you for
yeah.
asking that.
We like days off. Fantastic. Well, welcome. And I'm going to kick off with an intro for Bukky, and then we'll segue over to Al, our other fantastic guest today. So what I did is I put your bio into my reliable large language model, and it came out with a concise 5-point summary, Bukky, which I don't know if you agree with this or not, but what it says about you is it says you're a senior leader, coach, and author. So pretty established in the field. EdTech thought leader, particularly like that one. I thought that was great. Leadership coach as well, which I know you do, and a real advocate for diversity in education, an ambassador for Leadership Matters. And I know you've done a lot of work in the diversity space. And one of the topics we're going to be looking at today is kind of missing voices and representation and biases, which I know is going to be such a fascinating conversation. So welcome to AI Sprints. We've been chatting for ages behind the scenes. So it's so lovely to actually get you here in person, well, digitally, and welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
And then our other guest, Al Kingsley, recently MBE, welcome as well. Never met you, Al, but had lots to do with you. Lovely to have you here.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. And your CV is equally as impressive. And what I did, I summarized it as well, just to keep it equal with 5 and 5. CEO of Net Support. You're a chair of BSA EdTech groups and regional SEND boards. So we'll focus on SEND. I see a lot of the work you do on social media around SEND, and it's really inspiring. You advise the East of England RSC. What does RSC stand for, Al?
Regional Schools Commissioner. It's actually a Regional Schools Director now. I guess there's a promotion in there somewhere. But that's amazing. I sit on that advisory board.
Fantastic. And you're an author of this book, which if you haven't got a copy of yet, I highly endorse. And Al's not paying me any money for this whatsoever, but it is a really good book. And what I just said to Al, what I love about it is it's a pick and go book, or you can sit and immerse yourself in it. It's called The Awkward Questions in Education, and it's published by David Fulton. Is that correct, publisher? And you can get this via the link that we're going to chuck in the chat feed right now. You've also got the bios for both of our guests today, Bukky and Al, and you'll have some information on their social media feed, so you can chase that up and get involved and connect that way. Also, Al, you're an advocate for diversity in education, and I know that you and Bukky have done a lot of work together before, so there's a good symmetry there established. And you're an ambassador for Leadership Matters, so lots of symmetry, lots of correlation, lots of crossover. And we're going to get stuck right in a moment into a really important question, and we're going to invite the audience to get stuck in too. But before we do that, just to say that this episode is sponsored by Brain Freeze. Brain Freeze have sponsored another episode in the AI Sprints that was hugely popular. And today that we're going to have the CEO and owner, John, joining us shortly to talk over a 5-minute demo that's going to happen around about the 4:30 mark if we keep to the timescales, guys. And off the back of that, there'll be a promo code for those of you that are new to this and you haven't come across Brain Freeze. You're going to get to try it, which is fantastic. And like I always say with these sprints, we're going to be doing some demos. So your large language model of choice, you can have on in the background. Other news, the AI sprints, you can catch up on demand. So we've seen a huge amount of you catching up via the STEM Learning community, and we're going to put a link in the chat. Lots of you have been engaging, reaching out and speaking about how useful you found those. And it's really heartening for us to hear that you're using those in your schools for your CPD and your training with your own staff. So I was chuffed to hear that, and this will be no exception, I'm sure. So if you can't join us live today, you can catch up on demand like your best Netflix shows. All right, okay, so let's get stuck in. We've got a juicy conversation today. It's one that's dear to my heart. We're going to be looking at this idea of a world being indifferent and who AI is designed to care about. And what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm just going to invite both our guests to consider the first provocation for today, which is really, when it comes to AI, do you think it's it's possible for this technology to care? So hit us up in the chat feed whilst Al and Bukky are contemplating that deep and meaningful question. When it comes to AI in education, do you think it's possible for this technology to care? All right. So who would like to
dive
go
in
first?
with a starter for 10?
Yeah,
Please do. Please do.
Isn't that an interesting question? I do love it. I think if you want a really short answer, the answer right now is no. But because there's a natural persuasion for us to, I think is it anthropomorphize, put that kind of human quality on it. And if I pronounce that wrong, please don't judge me. There is an element of us trying to put human capabilities and thought processes to artificial intelligence. That said, whilst a short answer might be the most convenient answer, there is also an element that if we choose to seed our large language models or the resources that we put in with resources and content that is designed to support or amplify certain facets that we want to include within that, then there is the equal opportunity that we can use AI tools to amplify. So we can amplify human sentiment, but of course that works both directions, doesn't it too? And I think we see that where we can say that maybe some of our appeal with how large language models are evolving is when we look at ones that are more narrow in their focus, where we have those guardrails, we can have data and resources that are very specific or much more specific around an educational setting. And whilst there's not the exact explicit guardrail there, I think that does bring it in, so we could say that there is more support and nurture focused around this, and I think that ties in with that mindset that where do we sit? I don't want to go off on a slight traverse here, but they often talk right now about we're in our third digital divide, Alex. So if the first one was the rich had computers and the poor didn't, and then the second was that the rich had the technology and the skills to use it effectively, whereas the poor didn't have that technology and skills together. We're at this point now where the bigger gap is not the technology, but it's the skills and understanding. So you could take an idea from that says having access to something like even an inhuman AI bot that provides you access to learn and develop skills is more beneficial than nothing, and it is something that could be then nuanced around that.
Fascinating. And that was a pretty layered answer. Thanks, Al. We went deep straight from the offset, so that's fantastic. And Bukky, do you need me to go with a question again, or did you?
No. I've got a question. Thank you so much. I think Al, you pretty much covered it. I've seen some of the responses that come through the chat. It's a tool, so can it care? Not really. But I think with regards to say like AI in education, it's about the people, the teachers, the educators actually put the care into that, and we can actually expand upon that later on. But I think someone actually touched upon it in the chat as well. It's about giving the feeling of care. So for example, sometimes you have conversations with chatbots, even with certain large language models, it gives that particular aspect that you're engaging with someone, even you're not quite sure who that person is. And I think that hopefully we'll come back to this in more detail. I think that is where the element of concern, particularly from education's perspective, will come into this, about then treating the tool as a person or a substitute for people. And I'll leave it at that particular point. So in short, no, it cannot, but I think the educators can make it feel as though it does care.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that point. And just to kind of mention one of Laura Knight's points on that as well, she kind of agreed with you and spoke very much about how students, young people, can kind of mediate towards, or heliotropize was the word she uses, which is borrowed from biology, towards this kind of synthetic intimacy and this kind of idea of having a synthetic friend, which is fascinating. I'm going to play devil's advocate slightly and just kind of throw something into the mix for the audience to think about. So as a teacher myself, one of the things I was blown away with in the last 18 months was, have you seen these AV1 robot heads, these little white robot heads that sit in classrooms?
Yeah.
And although they're not AI at the moment, they are educational technology, and they're quite warm human use of it. So where I saw it used best is I rocked up to my class and it was just sat there and I had no idea what it was. Obviously it's a robot head, and then it started speaking and the eyes lit up and it started doing stuff. And the child who couldn't be in my class due to having a really weak immune system and quite a serious illness was sat at home with an iPad connecting to the learning, which in itself is pretty magical. But they weren't necessarily, that wasn't the most powerful thing. The most powerful thing is when the lesson finished and it was break, or if you're joining us from America, recess, the kids picked this little head up and they took it outside and they socialized it. So the kid that was at home what do they miss the most about school? Probably not my teaching, unfortunately. But they do miss their mates, and they put a little wig on it. They had like eyeliner, and that kid gets that connection. I think that what we're starting to see with technology is this ability to connect all over the world and bring the world closer and closer. So really rich, fantastic insight to start. Thank you both. So Bukky, I'm going to segue back to you quickly. And you're a real advocate for diversity in STEM and EdTech more broadly. I know you've done a lot of work in this field, and you sit on a lot of panels, you speak at a lot of events as a keynote. So what can we as teachers do to improve equity when it comes to AI use?
Oh, that's like $1 million question. So I thought I'd actually start off by actually defining what, like we mean by equity in this particular point. Equity in education basically means that all students have access to high quality learning and appropriate support. And I think that one of the things that persists is the gap between students who are SEND, those who've got additional learning needs, and not. And I think that what teachers can actually do in the first instance, although not necessarily easy, is explore ways in which AI can actually support like neurodiverse students with additional learning needs, even students with additional English as additional language, and look at maybe ways of personalizing learning, adapting the learning experience, even providing behavioral support in the first instance. Now, that's a huge ask. If we could actually impact upon that, I think we could really change the education experiences for many young people, overnight. But I think, as I say, it's just taking time to actually think about how can we actually tailor and personalized learning experiences and also assessments in ways that we're not doing. That takes time, that takes research, that takes collaboration. It also takes, if I step back a little bit, it also takes the framework and the culture being set up from the senior leadership. That is not something that a teacher can actually set out and do. That would work in tandem with the school leaders' priorities and the development plan focuses as well. So it's a big thing, but that's what I'll share in the first instance.
Interesting. So equity, kind of bringing access and accessibility to these children from different backgrounds, like you mentioned, SEND, potentially children from English as an additional language is a really interesting way to kind of frame equity. I love that. That's cool. And if you joined us late, we were just chatting about Al's book just at the start of the session. Here it is again. That's the second time out. That's it. You only get 2 strikes. But the reason I mention it on this occasion is in this new book, which is called The Awkward Questions in Education, where you ask some difficult questions. You ask the reader to consider equity, and you pose the question, how do we bridge the digital divide and guarantee all students have the necessary access and support? What advice would you give to teachers on that note?
Well, thank you for sharing it, and do keep that book down now. You've done a very grand job there of sharing. I suppose I could start the conversation really quickly by saying, if I had delusions of grandeur and I had total control over the worldwide education system and we started again, I wouldn't start by looking at places to put the bricks and mortar. I'd be looking in terms of, given the landmass and geography of the planet, I'd be looking first at how do I put a device in every child's hand that gives them all equitable access to the same quality of education, no matter where they were. But then I'd want to put the bricks and mortar in all the places to bring those people together to develop those most important, rich social experiences and community and other things that are really important. Now, it turns out I don't have the power to do that. And thank goodness for most of us. So then you think, well, how do I make things a little bit easier in terms of narrowing the digital divide right now? And I think the first one is you adopt that kind of least barriers mindset. So up until probably the pandemic, we would judge technology, for example, based on this one gives us way more features on the toolbar than the other one for the same price, so we'll get that. And suddenly we realized that actually the best tools are not the ones with the most features. They're the ones that are most easy to use, most accessible, most flexible, most secure, most platform agnostic. So we look at the least barrier mindset of, let's keep things simple. Let's not introduce technology that creates a digital divide within the school by making them inaccessible to learners. Let's try and standardize where we can on technology. Perhaps let's prioritize how we use and access resources. I always think in terms of equity, both in school and following that beyond. There's also a mindset, Alex, that's around not always looking for the richest. Sometimes you want things like an offline, low data type approach to technology. I mean, the list goes on in terms of really thinking about revising what we're trying to do. If we always have that kind of starter mindset of we're thinking about equity in terms of ease of use, simplicity, scalability, if we think when we pull together, and I often come to things from that first approach of a digital mindset to how we can use technology to support our learners and level the playing field, that we really have to come from the optics of sometimes less is more, and sometimes we have to start with the why. We're very good at defining what we plan to do and how we plan to do it, and we often don't pause on the why we're actually doing this. And more importantly, I think when it comes to inclusivity with the way that we adopt change, and certainly when we adopt technology, something I know Bukky and I resonate on, you sometimes also have to refine your measures of impact. Not every decision is purely about teaching and learning outcomes. Sometimes it's just about being accessible, closing the feedback loop, reducing workload, making technology more accessible to learners, particularly our more vulnerable learners. Maybe that comes back full circle to the earlier question, that there's a sense that technology cares because it's always there for me and it's responding. But it's first and foremost, I feel like I have access to the same tools and opportunities within the classroom as every other learner to meet my needs.
Yeah, and I think that access to tools like every other learner is such a crucial sentence, really, isn't it? Because it's something we haven't managed to do yet. I mean, if you take the pandemic, for example, which was hugely disruptive for many reasons, and now you've alluded to the fact that if you could rule the educational world, you'd look at, rather than physical spaces, you alluded to kind of digital digital connections, hybrid world. Sorry, that was the word I was looking for. So that's really interesting, and we'll explore that in a moment. But just thinking back to what Laura mentioned, she brought to the audience thinking with care as a phrase, which I've adopted. I love it. I think it's such a great way to teach our children how to think. So we're essentially talking about two worlds here, the supervised world and the unsupervised world. So Bukky, what's your interpretation of the difference? What is the supervised AI world for our children? What's the unsupervised AI world?
Gosh, I interpret it as supervised world is what happens within school, and unsupervised is basically everything that happens out of school with regards to AI. And I think it's an interesting, I love that distinction because it goes back to the robots analogy you actually gave about for some young people, they can't come into school. So how do we actually provide for them? So I think there's a number of different things we can actually consider. One of those I was thinking about is, for example, how we ensure that young people are digital citizens or the digital literacy. So it's about, irrespective of where you are, when you're using AI, for example, it's about thinking of how you remain safe, how you evaluate the information. So, how you can identify misinformation, all these things. And I think that therefore it's about the tools that we actually use. Now, the CRAP tool is one that is very commonly known, where you look at the currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, purpose. But, and this is where, if I'm allowed to, I actually raise this particular book. So it's AI in Education, a Student Handbook by Matthew Weymouth. Sorry, Matt, if you're watching this. Weems. Okay, all right, I get it completely wrong. But there's a really powerful tool in here that I think or framework that can be to use. It's called the, she says, the pair approach. So it's, you get students to think about AI in terms of the problem that you're trying to achieve, the AI selection, basically which tool you're going to use for the job, interaction, how you're going to work with the AI, and reflection, what worked, what didn't work. The reason I think tools like this can work within schools or beyond schools is the different prompts that we have, but the reflection prompt I think is really powerful. So, and it emphasizes the impact of you're using the tool to learn. So things like, my understanding improved when ... I found it most helpful when the AI ... The AI helped my thinking when ... I stopped using the AI when ... So it's getting this young people to think about, how did it help me learn? What are the limitations? And get them to be critical thinkers. So I think the critical thinking, digital literacy, digital citizenship aspects are really key. And making sure that's reinforced and modeled persistently, I think is a way of actually approaching that.
Fascinating. I want to ask a question about critical thinking, because I hear this, you got to be a critical thinker, teach your kids to be critical thinkers. And I agree with it. But one of my questions to you is, what are we teaching them to be critical of? Because one of my criticisms is that sometimes it's just chucked out there as a phrase. What do we want them to be critical of?
To analyze the information, even what we teach them as well. So to think about, okay, this has been presented to me. is it correct or not? Do I agree with it or not? How do I know? What are the sources of information? I think that if we can get them to think about it in that particular way, you can use that in a classroom, you can use that online, you can use it with a particular tool. That is what I mean by critical thinking in that regard. So you're constantly evaluating and having frameworks around that can help you assess what you are learning and the validity of it. Can I also add as well, part of the supervised, unsupervised aspect, I think one thing we forget is about the parents and carers and families and how we get them to support. So again, it's not a promo, but it's just, so this is a book called The Digital Savvy Parent by Yeti Williams. And I think it shines a light on the fact that parents, carers, families often want to provide support, liaise with the schools, but they're not quite sure how to do that. And I think that schools also need to consider whatever advice and support you provide for the young people, parents, families, and carers also need to have input in that regard as well.
Interesting. And Al, you're agreeing with a lot of those points that Bukky made about the critical thinking aspect. Have you got anything to add to that part?
There's a couple of little strands that I wanted to pull out on. And I think the first thing is, and sticking within the mindset, I guess, of our broader topic today, is, we keep talking about AI and we end up talking about the tools and the opportunities, the challenges and so on. The biggest one that resonates the most for me right now is that AI highlights, with its technology capable to do many of the most powerful computational thinking roles, that it actually puts greater onus, particularly when we think of future workplace and society, on those most human of skills as being the commodity in demand in the future. And critical thinking, communication skills, resilience, imagination, creativity, all those soft skills are very much the power skills that amplify through. So they come with an absolute must. But you also kind of covered on quite a few things there. When I'm thinking back to Laura's thinking approach, I kind of put my strands down as, if you're thinking about those kind of guidelines when it comes to AI, you can start with think purposefully, making sure what's the purpose, why do we choose to use this tool, is it cool, or is there actually a purpose and intent? You can always use the hold on to humanity approach, which is AI can support but isn't there to replace the human being. It hopefully frees up time for more human to human connection, and using that sort of education adage, in some cases maybe the sage on the stage becomes the guide on the side, but it follows through. We also need to think when we're looking at a tool, not just who will this benefit, but who might this work against. So then we can consider access, language, neurodiversity, SEND needs, and so on. And then we can say, let's make sure that as part of our strategy, we're nurturing digital citizenship, very much Bukky's point there, which is all about letting our students think about bias, fairness, authorship, responsibility, and so on. And then also, just because you can use AI doesn't mean you should. So having a pause, which is for tasks involving safeguarding relationships, personal stories, we all accept that some of the best lessons that happen in our schools involve no technology whatsoever. And I think the same applies as having that scale where we think. And then we can say, well, if we are going to use it and we happen that in this context, this setting, it adds value, then we need to make sure that we work transparently, that we collaborate and feedback, and that at the heart of what we're doing, we're always safeguarding. So we're always thinking about that. What are we sharing? Where are we sharing it? How long is it being shared for? And who has access to it from a data perspective? And we're also making sure that it's being done in a constructive way. I mean, there's lots of frame rails around that, but I think the fundamental of this is just because technology can do something doesn't mean it should. And we need to be really mindful that this isn't about advocating or removing the human in the loop. This is about a tool, like many other tools, that a professional will use their judgment of whether it's appropriate. They'll use their professional judgment on the input and the output, and they will look at ways where pedagogy leads to how will I weave this into teaching and learning where it's appropriate. You are on mute, my friend.
Sorry, am I back?
You are.
Yeah, so I was saying this is a sprint today, guys. So we're going fast. We're covering lots of ground in a short period of time. Yeah. So you can always watch this back. If any of the ideas spike your interest and you thought, oh, that's really fascinating, I'd love to hear that again. This will be available in the STEM learning community within 24 hours. So, this time tomorrow, you'll be able to rewatch it and share it again. And I want to summarize some of the points just before we kind of segue into the next point. We were talking initially about supervised and unsupervised environments. And we categorize them as supervised being the school where the teacher has an eye over what AI is being used. And what I want to ask you guys just quickly is what sorts of AI tools are being used in the supervised environment? So just to give a bit of clarity for the teachers that are watching this, what are we referring to there? Give me some examples.
I mean, typical examples, if you think of generative AI, you're seeing tools like Canva and other resources being used that are allowing output of content. Non-generative AI all comes under the same umbrella. There's lots of personalized learning tools. You might be thinking about Sentry and other tools that's very much about looking at student performance and based on what questions they answer, either stretching them on their knowledge or taking them back for some foundational bits. There's less, but it's developing in terms of that immediate jump into, hey, students are using Copilot. That's it. I think it's more wrapped around tools. And then obviously you've got staff looking at tools like TeachMate AI, where it might help them when it comes to lesson preparation, SLT AI, when you're looking at teacher, senior leadership resources, Olex I've come across, which is a great one that looks at text and will analyze handwritten English resources and provide quick feedback and analysis. The list goes on, but I also think most of the schools that have ambitions around AI, it's not consistent yet, because what we tend to have is we have some practitioners who are really strong and confident in playing and using some of the tools, but we haven't always found the best mechanism. I use an adage, and apologies for going slightly off tap. If I walk into any school or multi-academy trust, sometimes my own to be fair, and say, who are the linguists, who are the historians, people can point me to a list in 30 seconds. If I say, who are the Canva specialists, who are the Copilot specialists, there tends to be tumbleweed. And the truth is, if new staff coming into the organization don't know who the go-to colleagues are, they can go and pick their brains on. Actually, people are a lot less comfortable and confident about trying stuff. And so the barrier is having the confidence to try.
Good point. Good point. And Bukky, what about the unsupervised? What sort of AIs are our kids accessing away from school? And we categorized, didn't we, unsupervised as school or away from school?
How long is a piece of string? It could be anything.
Give me the top five. Give me the top five. What in your experience?
I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. The users of ChatGPT, I always say it wrong way. The Chat One, Claude, Perplexity, the usual things. I'm just trying to think about others. What was it? We haven't actually mentioned. So some of the AI tools, for example, for like students with additional learning needs, like for example, PicTalky, transcription tools, like Otter AI, for example, or even there's another one that's just gone right out of my head. Grammarly, for example, gobbling tools. Good. So those are some examples to name but a few. But as I said, it's a wide variety.
And Hello Barbie apparently has an integrated AI as well now, which is fascinating, isn't it? Off the back of the movie success last year, you learn something every day. Okay, great. I'm just going to sort of talk a little bit about what's coming next. So if you joined us a little bit late, welcome to AI Sprints. This is episode 4 of season 1. Episode 5 is coming up with John Dolman and Darren Curran. That's going to be on the 2nd of July, and we'd love you to join us for that. That concludes the season. And guess what, guys? We've got a massive announcement to make at that episode, that particular episode, episode 5. So tune in for that. We're going to be sharing, I think Tim already has shared the last 3 episodes, which episode 1 was with Darren Cox and Priya Lakhani. Episode 2, Lord Jim Knight and Daisy Christodoulou. Episode 3 was with Laura Knight and John Chippendale. And episode 4 today, as you can see, is with Al and Bukky. So that's all on there, the chat feed. Please engage via the chat. A couple of people are asking for questions. Somebody said, I think they were talking to you, Al, could you put a list of some of the stuff you mentioned there? But also for you guys in the chat feed, don't be afraid to put your own recommendations for tools. We're normally pretty good as a community, so there's always good to see what people are using. So please chuck it, if it's TeachMate AI, if it's quizzes, which actually is changing to a new name apparently, but chuck it all in the chat feed and let's have a look at what you're using as educators too. And if you're new to AI, this might seem fast, it might seem radical, it might seem that it's too quick, but you can watch it back, so don't stress. So we're going to segue quickly into a demo from our sponsor Brain Freeze. Before we do that, something for our guests and for the audience to think about. When we come back from the second half, we are going to start exploring some biases. We're going to explore hallucination and the word that Al said perfectly, anthropomorphism, of AI, how it kind of mimics human behavior. And we're going to explore who the missing voices are as well, Bukky, in terms of, who's not represented in these data sets where it's trained. All right, so Tim, we're doing pretty well for time. Would you be able to set up the Brain Freeze demo? Thanks for everyone sharing what they're using in the chat. Good to see Notebook LM on there. Okay, we can see it. So I'm going to mute myself.
Right.
And John's going to come on and walk us through.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody. My name's John Marshall. I'm with a company called Brain Freeze, and we provide tools for education. It's been a fascinating conversation so far because I feel like what we've tried to do as an organization is link in all of these different components to a technology platform that allows you to be successful, whether you're a teacher, administrator, you're running a school or a district, or a parent, or any type of participant in the process. So if we want to go ahead and kick it off, I can just kind of show a couple of things and how they really tie into this conversation. Because what I've tried to do with this demo is link everything on the technology side back to how we can help solve these problems. So here we go. All right. So what you're looking at right here is kind of a teacher interface to find your assistant. And we've created hundreds of assistants, but teachers can go create their own assistants. And in this case, they want to create a lesson plan. And what's really nice here is we talked about accessibility and also, this customization. But things have to be relevant. And so as a school, you often have your own curriculum, your methodology, etc. And so being able to incorporate all of that kind of DNA into the AI platform is really important. So in this example, we're tying in a curriculum specific to a school or a location, and we're bringing that into an end user example. You can also have your own sort of chat experiences, which have the guardrails and the parameters around this. But even more importantly, this is an example of grounding something so there's no hallucination. So if you have policies, or if you have what doesn't matter, quizzes, text, etc., all of that needs to be grounded. So in this example, you had a simple question, but you don't want the LLM or you don't want AI to go make up an answer. You want to actually see in a handbook where that answer is. And it's really important to reduce hallucination, reduce bias, and be grounded. I also feel like teacher-parent interaction is a game changer with AI. And in this example, we're creating a simple example where teachers could prep for a parent meeting, but I think this is also very traditional. I think with AI, we're going to move in the situation where we can improve engagement between parents and teachers and students, and we can make things more real time. And instead of once a quarter, once a semester type interaction, I think this can be very dynamic. And I think AI has the power to create these very dynamic interactions between all parties involved, and really be able to find the one-on-one scenarios where you need to improve something. So maybe perhaps you need to improve a skill set, or somebody's ahead in English, but they're behind in math, and you want to create a virtual tutor, or you want to create a virtual lesson plan, or you want to create an assistant for them. So as a teacher, what you can do is really focus on the creativity and the soft skills and kind of the components that were mentioned a few minutes ago. And then you can create these tools where you're really pushing one-to-one or special needs, or you're creating an environment with the technology to help a student not get left behind. Maybe they need extra help in math, or maybe they need extra help in spelling. And now with all the voice models out there, you can really leverage so many of these things, like learning second languages, or being able to articulate a question, or being able to teach somebody. Everybody learns differently. So these concepts of one-to-one education, creating virtual tutors, making teachers more efficient so that they can actually provide these types of assistance is amazing. Special needs is a really important component. It's called something different everywhere around the world, but being able to do something where a teacher could even create their own assistant. So without having to go to administrator, without having to go to IT, without having to go create something themselves on ChatGPT, they can have a protected environment where they want to say, I want to create an assistant for an individual student, or I want to create an assistant to help my students learn about space in my context of math, or whatever it is. So the ability to go create these kind of real-time virtual classroom environments where you can create a subject, plus you mix your own curriculum, maybe your own bias of your methodology of what works for you, so important these days. And we do all that because on the back end of our platform, we incorporate all the different models. We have hundreds of models in the back end that we really help to leverage to create the best outcome for teachers. We have all the data sources and the integration. So we want to build upon the student information systems that exist. We want to build upon all these different technology platforms that exist, because it's really about providing data and information from these different sources, and then doing it in a way that has all the protections, avoiding toxicity, avoiding obscenity, avoiding threats or insults or bad behavior or bad language. Sometimes you can't stop it, but you can have tracking of it. and you can flag it. So having real auditable information of exactly what happens, that gives people the confidence that they can actually deploy this. So that was kind of a quick drive-by, but I think what we're trying to do is provide this platform that's fully encompassing, that's built on all the technology solutions that schools have invested in for the past 10 years, that provides these one-to-one type training environments. And most importantly, it allows teachers to do what they do best. Teachers, at the core, they love, they care, they're passionate, they want to help students learn. And these types of solutions now can do that in a way where teachers don't have to go home and spend 5 hours building a lesson plan or grade papers or create and find research on their own. AI is the enabling tool to allow them to be more productive, more caring, more interactive with parents, more interactive in one-to-one, more interactive with special needs. So I think AI is a real enabler, and we've tried to put the guardrails and the security and the protections in place to make that happen.
Amazing. Thank you, John. And if there was a code there that we're going to share in the chat feed, and teachers can use your technology, talk us through
it's
kind
free
of
for teachers, and you don't even need the code anymore. It's a QR code. It's free for teachers globally. It's available in Arabic. It's available in multi-byte characters for the end user teachers. So for teachers globally, you can go in free. And then if you're doing a school rollout, it's, I don't want to get into selling, but we've made it incredibly cheap in this, 50 cents a user, which is, 30 something, pence or whatever. But it's ridiculous, inexpensive, because this is a bit of a do good. We really feel like this can be a game changer, and it has to be accessible. And if any teacher in the world can go in and leverage all these tools for free, what an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, John. And you're joining us from Miami today. Is that where you are today? You're based in Miami?
Yeah, I'm in the States, and but we have a big presence in London. We have a presence in Singapore, in Dubai, in Australia. So we're quite global in India, in Bulgaria, throughout Asia. So we have quite a big presence. We're part of a bigger technology platform company that builds AI tools, and so we have quite a big presence around the world. And really, we've brought these corporate level secure tools to education, which is very exciting.
Yeah, amazing. And feel free to jump in later on when we talk about where this data is being trained, because most of it, obviously, other than DeepSeek, is out on the West Coast, Silicon Valley. But you might correct me on that later on. But feel free to jump into that part of the chat that's coming up. So thank you so much. And what we're going to look at now, guys, is I want to just start, Bukky and Al, by sort of demything a couple of words that we've used today. And we're going to start with hallucinations. So just for the audience, for those that don't know what we're talking about, because they might be thinking about human hallucinations. And this is, let's go with Bukky first. What's your interpretation of an hallucination when it comes to AI?
Getting information wrong, in short.
Okay.
Yeah, and presenting it in a convincingly factual way.
Which can be quite dangerous for children if they take that, and teachers if they take that as bespoke. And I know that sort of non-specialist physics teachers sometimes come at this where they use lesson generators, and then they don't necessarily have the skills and expertise to be able to look at whether it has hallucinated. So that was really concise. Fantastic. Al, you got a slightly more difficult one. Your favorite word, anthropomorphic. What do we mean by anthropomorphic?
Yeah, well, in essence, assigning human characteristics to a piece of technology. I suppose we started off with trying to measure it when everyone sort of thought of the Turing test originally. Could it con us into thinking we were communicating with a human being rather than technology? But that was as much to do about how we do linguistics and how we actually articulate in a convincing way. What we see now when it comes to this concern, I suppose, is the idea that we could have a chatbot that's used in a perfectly helpful way to share resources with a child, but a child might derive an understanding that it has emotions, that it's friendly, that it has their best interests at heart. And like all things, we have the yin and the yang of there are positive ways that a relationship can provide nurture and support, or at least something that will give a feedback quickly, versus the risks that come with that. But I think we tend to sometimes assign gender to tools, and we talk about them them in a human sense. And I think that's one where, a little bit like we've got right now with, in a UK perspective, about a government supporting with some really good new resources about how do we make sure that all of our children start being more accessible and using AI. The challenge actually comes more to how do we find the time in the curriculum to actually teach some of these core foundational bits from the digital citizenship perspective before we get into the how do we do the competencies. And I think that's the bit where this conversation about would younger children assign, I mean, we have heard, like we hear on many of these things, some of the scary ones where we hear about chatbots that perhaps encourage children to do activities that would place them at risk or at harm or make them feel respond in a negative way. And again, I think it's just being mindful that some of these terms we tend to be drawn to the very end of the spectrums in terms of the output, but fundamentally that's what we're talking about. I think I went off on a bit of a tangent there, Alex. Apologies.
That's all good. I mean, I think we humans have a tendency to wrap technology up in metaphor. We do it for everything, don't we? We never merely see, we always see as. So AI is a black box, it's a mirror, it's a benevolent genie, it's a busy child, you name it. And we have a tendency to do that. So I guess anthropomorphize, that's a really good word at primary school to get the kids to phonetically break down, because it's a struggle every time I say
That's going to teach the phonics a bit of a stretch, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, I think. But John, I just want to bring you in on the bias. What's your kind of interpretation? Because you're an AI developer, you're someone behind the scenes that's creating products. So what's your interpretation of the word bias when it comes to AI? You're muted, John, by the way. There you go.
We all have to be quite suspect on the models and how they're built, because to me the bias is built into these models. And because these models are built by humans. So the fact that models are built by humans means they naturally have some level of bias in them. And we have to make sure that when we're building lesson plans or when we're teaching kids on top of these models, that we're doing it in a way that we are really grounding the results and we're testing the results. So I think that's a big part of what we do is, we not only want to build an assistant, but we really want to test that assistant, or we want to provide teachers or administrators tools to test that assistant, or to test these tools. So there's inherent bias because these tools are fundamentally built by humans, or data that humans have created. And I think part of what we need to do in education is based on the subject and based on what we're trying to teach them is make sure that we do the testing and try and course correct. I don't think you'll ever remove bias, but I think that we can course correct. And in some cases, bias may be a good thing. Maybe you have a bias that wants you to be more positive or more encouraging. So you can't always treat bias like a negative term. I think, there's different types of bias, and you have to evaluate and do that and really test the AI yourself.
Bukky, let's bring you in. I've got
there, but Bucky's beaten me.
She's got her hand up like a diligent
yeah, I put
student.
my hand up, just to think like Zoom. Thank you, John, for what you shared. And I love the fact about, the testing the bias. I think when I thought about bias, I got a definition because I'm thinking bias means different things to different people. And I think the key, what makes bias really challenging in what it is, good or bad, and how to deal with it is this: when you show an unreasonable preference or dislike based on personal opinion. If we link that then to unconscious bias, sometimes we may be thinking things just because everybody thinks that way, don't they? Surely. And I think that that's where the difficulty comes into it, because you may be receiving information, data, whatever it is, and think in your mind, actually, that's the norm, so to speak, whatever the norm is defined as, and therefore it will not be registered in your mind. Actually, I should challenge this as well. So I think that bias is challenging because sometimes it means that we have to challenge ourselves in what we believe to be correct, true, norm, or what have you. Not to say it's good or bad, but I think that this is what makes it very difficult from an internal perspective, but also within teaching as well.
Can I take that a step further, Alex? I mean, we always start with the kind of the clumsy analogies of search for doctor and you'll get a man, search for nurse and you'll get a woman. Some of those traditional biases that we saw based on to a degree, training data. Just before we started, I shared with you a couple of perhaps more practical examples. We often think from a context of where we are in the Western world. I used an example speaking at a conference quite recently in Saudi Arabia. There's an analogy there that 8% of the world speak Arabic, but only 3% of the internet's Arabic. So when it comes to training data, there's a disproportional gap when it comes to social, cultural, and other representations and information from a different societal perspective. I also met up quite recently with a project that Sandy Toksvik is doing, the Mapamundi project, which is going back over the last 200 or 300 years and documenting digitally all the amazing inventions and discoveries that women have made that up until 60 or 70 years ago were never documented in their name. So there are tiny steps that we can do to start working to shift the bias, the unconscious bias, back the other way. I think the bigger fear we have, and this is just one to pose, that maybe someone on the call will go, "Oh, Al, you're crazy," but you know, I've been accused of that before. We have a natural persuasion to say we don't want to share our data. We want to keep our data safe, and we need to make sure that we share as little as possible to these training models. And then there's a flip side that says, should we be surprised when we use AI tools and the data isn't exactly what we wanted? Should we not be surprised that if we don't share any data about ourselves or the demography from our schools or certain bits, then how would we expect the training data to represent us and our demography? And so I think there's this challenge that we end up with a very narrow focus, and that training data then uses fake data to further amplify, and we create more work for the likes of John and others to try and filter and put the safety rails in place. Whereas if we took a view of, well, maybe there is some element of our data that is important to share so that we get the right weightings and bias on some of these large language models moving forward, there could be some benefit there. That's a contentious point, and I'm not suggesting it's a yay or nay zero-sum output.
Bukky.
Just wanted to jump into what Al said, because I think it's really key. I think it's about trust. I think if we can trust, that how our data is being used, it is as much transparency as possible. Educators want the very best for their students. Of course, they'll jump in, but I think the key thing there is trust. So key point, but trust.
Yeah, fascinating. And what we're going to do now is I want the audience to think about the missing voices in AI, because we're kind of alluding to this bias, this training, where the models are trained. There's lots of comments in the chat feed around that. Just to put someone's mind at rest, I don't put the kids' names in when I do data analysis. I anomalize all the data. Sorry, I thought I should have said that. But I want you to think about the missing voices. Whose voices are missing from the training, from the AI, based on what everyone's just said? And we're going to do a kind of behind-the-scenes live demo. So what I've asked Al and Bukky to do is we're going to use 3 different large language models. So when we're talking about large language models, we're not talking about wrapper apps. We're talking about ChatGPT. We're talking about Google's Gemini. We're talking about Anthropic's Claude, and potentially Grok, if you're that way inclined. And lots of head shaking. I won't say anything, but I agree with you, Al. And potentially Copilot, which is Microsoft's product. So what we're going to do is, Al, I think you've got, remind me which one you've got up.
I've got Claude, ChatGPT, and Gemini open and ready for action.
Right. Well, what have you got, Bukky?
I've only got Claude. I've only got Claude open. So
Bukky's going to take Claude. Which ones? You've got Gemini, Al.
Yep.
I'll take ChatGPT. John, feel free to just jump on Copilot or whatever else is left. And we're going to put
I'm going to be a spectator.
Spectator, that's fine. Opt out.
Yeah.
So Tim and Simon, if you could just pop the little question in the chat feed about the question that we're going to put into the large language model is essentially we're just going to ask it to rank the 10 most influential scientists of all time, and then we're going to compare our notes across the different models to see how fair and representative this is. So we'll just wait for that to pop in the chat feed. Then if you've got your large language models up, I'd love you to play along and then grab a screenshot of your outputs, and we'll all chuck our outputs in the chat feed. So there we go. It's in there. Look, list me the 10 most influential scientists of all time. So we're all going to do that quickly, and we're going to come back with our different models. And it's fascinating. I do this on the Unlocking AI course, and it's always really interesting to see what it comes up with. So my little bubble is thinking, which is always a good sign. It means it's actually considering what I'm doing. And surprise, surprise, I've got the usual list that I get when I do this, which is great because it makes a point. I want to talk about this. Oh, hang on. No, I've got a bit of change for once. Yes, this is great. Okay, so when we're ready, guests, could we just pop into the chat feed what our large language model has spat out?
Yeah, I'll put mine in right now. Hopefully it's going to be.
And do you know what's cool is if you use AI a lot, you'll probably be able to tell who's using what based on the outputs. And my giveaway is obviously the way that it's formatted, which also can help you for plagiarism and AI detection with authenticity of student work because it tends to look a certain way. Okay, so what I want you to do, guys, is let's look at who was first, who put this list in. That was Copilot, so I think that was Al, wasn't it?
No, I'm just posting my Gemini in now. Actually, my Gemini was a bit slow. There you go. I've just put mine in there. So,
Well, yeah, whoever went first, it's 9 men and 1 woman. Marie Curie has made the list at number 5, which is fascinating because on my list on ChatGPT, she's number 3. And for once, this never happens, but 9 and 10, Ada Lovelace and Rosalind Franklin. Would you look at that? That's absolutely wonderful, isn't it?
Brilliant.
But Bukky, Marie Curie's at number 5 on yours.
And she was the only woman.
She's the only woman.
Same here. Only woman I got was number 5 as well, Marie Curie. Yeah.
So when I do this, Marie Curie always makes the list. She's always, which is great, isn't it? It's really fascinating. But my question to you is this just what we should expect from history in terms of sort of, or are there some missing voices here? And if so, how is this happening, guys? What's happening behind the scenes to give us this output?
Can I start by saying, because I teach science, so amongst the other things that I actually do, I teach GCSE science and A-level chemistry. And I wrote an article about maybe 3-4 years ago for the Association of Science Education about, lack of diversity in the curriculum. So for the national curriculum for Key Stage 4, the Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4, so in plain English for other people around the world, where we look at the curriculum for the students who are going to be taking their first national exams, if you've got students who do combined sciences, they've got 2 GCSEs in sciences, there are only 2 women that are mentioned of the whole list of men, scientists. So if that source of information for the 10 most important is, for example, the national curriculum or 3 of the main science specifications, then that's not surprising because that's what they prioritize as the greatest. And hence, I think that's where some of the missing voices will actually come into it as well.
Interesting.
I really love that. But I also think if you look at that list, you need to look at the dates. Those people identified are all pre a certain date. And that pre a certain date in history was a point where attributed great works were not identified and recorded against women. They were often recorded against teams or classed as a societal gain because it was just deemed to be more appropriate. So we could challenge, in my case, Gemini, but I suspect 10 years ago, if I'd have turned around and reached for my Encyclopedia Britannica, I could probably have challenged it too on its diversity and mix of recognition. So we do need to be mindful that whilst none of us are signing up to this as being equitable, we are also recognizing this might be one in this particular example where it's not explicitly about any algorithms. I think it's about the source language, the learning database that's referencing it.
Fascinating. And Simon, if you wouldn't mind popping in one of the 2, either the Ada Lovelace example or the Marie Curie example that's been doing the rounds on the internet. We're just going to explore it in a little bit more depth just before we wind up here. So in a minute in the chat feed, you should see a little tile pop up and it's a STEM learning theme tile, but on it is a case study that's been doing the rounds on the internet. If you can't find it, I can always share it on the screen, but oh, there it is. Okay, cool. So Marie Curie was the first person to travel to space, demonstrating the bravery and innovation typical of female scientists. The AI believes she is an ideal role model for young women pursuing astrophysics, as she often expressed excitement about space exploration. According to her 1965 autobiography, Curie credited her work with NASA for shaping her scientific worldview. Okay, so what I want us to think about when we look at this, and this is quite a fun thing to do with kids as well, and I know this one's been doing the rounds, is think about the hallucinations here. What is just factually incorrect? Think about the biases, but also the anthropomorphism, and see if you can identify where it is. And I might ask our guests, put them on the spot a bit, and ask them to identify maybe the bias and the hallucinations in what you can see in that example. And Simon, we might as well chuck in the Ada Lovelace one. Did I put that in the feed or not? I can't remember if I did, but that would be a fun one to do.
Can I throw an interesting one in that whilst you're doing that,
Yeah.
I just thought I would ask Gemini to do the exercise for me and identify where the parts were that were hallucinated or biased. And it's identified that the biased element was demonstrating that bravery and innovation are typical of female scientists. This phrase is well intentioned, but let's be clear, it leans into a positive stereotype where not all female scientists would be brave or innovative. And actually, it's kind of got it back to front. It's tried to look for something on the basis of assigning a general quality, good or bad. I mean, there is an element of accuracy in that, but it's also taken down very much more the wrong pathway on that. Can I get the easy point and leave Bukky the tough ones? I don't think she went to space. I think that's one of ones. I just want to put that out there and show that I've done my intellectual contribution for this.
But did Neil Armstrong? Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So go on, Bukky. You got what else can you see in there that worries you?
I'm interested about her 1965 autobiography. I really need to read that one.
That would be an absolute award winner, Booker Prize winner. And obviously her work with NASA as well, which is totally fabricated. So really interesting, isn't it? And I did a similar one with Ada Lovelace and I used it with the kids. And just going back to Darren and Priya's point, what they were saying is we need to speak to children more about AI. We need to have more open and one of the episodes, spoiler alert, coming up is on Oracy and Kate Paradine, CEO Voice 21 is going to join us. And we're going to look at that. We're going to look at how do we speak to children about AI in a really safe and sensible way. So that's been fascinating today. We are winding up, guys. And I could go for another hour easily. But I'll get told off if I do. So I want to say on behalf of STEM Learning and Brain Freeze, thank you so much to both of you and coming to share your insights and expertise. I've learned loads today. It's been absolutely fascinating. If you have any questions for us, we might have time for a couple. I've got a few other bits to mention, but please just have a little think. If you've got any question for our guest today, you can connect and reach out to both Bukky and Al via the bios and LinkedIn profiles that we shared at the start of the session. If anything today has spiked your interest, you can watch it on demand. Tim and Simon will chuck in that link once again because I think it's quite buried now. But essentially, they are all our recordings of our previous 3 episodes, which include the live demos of other products as well. We've got a conference coming up at the end of June in York. So if you're anywhere sort of London upwards, get yourself on a train. It's term 6. We've lost our year 11s, most of us almost. We've lost our year 13s. SATs are over. It's that easy term, isn't it, where we can start planning and thinking for September. I'd just like to say our speakers at that conference, we've got Darren Coxon, and who came on the first episode, who Al's given a round of applause. I'm a big fan of his work, a very reliable voice in the field. Top man. He's speaking. And we've also got John Chippendale, who is the CEO of TeachMate AI. And his keynote fascinates me. He's going to be talking about a potato, so I'm really interested to see what that's about. There's also a really rich range of workshops. I'm running a couple. We're looking at ethics. We're looking at teacher reduction. There's a ton of people, including Darren, running workshops, and not just AI in digital spaces as well. So, and it's pretty affordable. So if you want to come and join that. If you're interested in diving in more depth to any of the stuff we've done today, we do cover this on a course called Unlocking AI with STEM Learning. It's 6 hours. It's 4 90-minute modules that I run, and it's been very popular. We've currently got 24 people doing cohort 3, and our next cohort recruits in September. And that's not so much a plug, just a next steps in case you're interested. John, there's been a couple of comments about not being able to access Brain Freeze registration link. Have you seen that in the chat?
I have not.
If you go a bit further up, there are a couple of folks who are struggling to use. It's just before we did the Marie Curie stuff. Actually, it's before all the prompts. There's a couple of people saying that they're struggling with registration links. And then next up, guys, on the 2nd of July, keep your diary free because we're going to do a massive announcement. Massive, huge. I think it's going to be really exciting. I think you're going to love it. The second thing is we got John Dolman, who's known as the AI English teacher, and Dave Curran, who's an all-round AI guru, joining us as our guest. And we're going to look at some really practical classroom teacher uses of AI, and we're going to be speaking about that. Now, today's episode hasn't been that, but we're certainly going to dive into, so how can we do this in the primary, secondary classroom with some demos and some interactive, and Brain Freeze are coming back for that episode too. So looking forward to seeing what John and the team come up with for a demo there. So lots coming. Thank you.
Before you dash, there's a couple of hands up in the chat. I don't know if you've got a couple of minutes.
Yeah, we do literally have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'll let you have at it.
Let's go Nuno first.
You
of
are
all.
unmiked, people with hands up. You can turn your mics on.
So Nuno, what have you got for us? What would you like to know? Nothing
Go
from
ahead and take the
Nuno.
hand down.
Yeah. And then who was the other person you mentioned? Jamil. Would you like to say something, Jamil? You got Jamil for the...
Yep.
No. Hello,
Mics
Jamil.
are loud.
Do you want to ask us a question? You cannot unmute. Classic error.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. EdTech always lets us down. So that
Feel free
kind
to
of
type it in the chat and we'll pick it up afterwards.
Definitely. And just to finish, thank you so much to the guests, to the audience, to the conversation, to everything that came around it. Really rich, really great dialogue. Thank you for your time. Everyone, safe travel home if you're driving back from school or if you're already at home. Good on you. And we look forward to seeing you at episode 5 of the AI Sprints, which will be on the 2nd of July. Bukky, John, Al, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
See
Alex.
you all soon.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Have a nice day.
Yep, you too.